It's the Corvette Web Blast.
Hello and welcome to the second Corvette Web Blast of 2014. We've got the same people back. We're back with Tom here at Claremont Corvette. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Are you having a good year?
Excellent, thank you.
Yes. We have Gary Garwood.
Hi.
And I'm Rob Ashard, and we're all members of the CCCUK. Gary and I are somewhat new compared to Tom. Tom was a founder member in
1979.
79.
At Heston Services on the M4 on a very, very wet Sunday afternoon.
Fantastic. And we've also got Nigel Dobby. Nigel, you're in Florida, aren't you, at the moment?
Yes, I'm in Florida, a place called Hudson, which is just north of Tampa.
And when did you join the CCCUK?
When I first bought a C3, which was, I think, 1995, so 19 years.
Wow, OK, that beats us. And our special guest today is also one of the earlier members, Keith Beschi. Hello, Keith.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
And you joined the CCCUK in?
Well, it was around December 1980, about the time that I bought my my C3 Corvette, which I still own. I bought it from you.
Excellent. And of course, you're running Eurovets, which is a sort of a C4 specialist. That's right.
Yes, it kind of evolved from the project which we were going to talk about. But yes, C4, 5, and 6, and latterly now, obviously C7.
So the thing we're going to talk about today is you have a very special C4. Tell us about it.
Well, very briefly, because of my involvement in the club, not only being chairman at one point of my life, membership secretary, events organiser, etc. I had a call back in 1995, I think it was, no, 94, that there was a whole load of Corvettes in a scrapyard in Norfolk. I went off to see them, identified them as test mules from the Lotus LT5 project, which I've been involved with as far as inviting Lotus down to one of our Goodwood race circuit meetings, which Tom will probably remember, when we had one of the test drivers driving around Goodwood circuit at ridiculous speeds. It was a very memorable day, I seem to think. Remember it, Tom?
Fantastic day, absolutely marvellous. Yeah.
It's an absolute privilege to be in by sitting beside any professional driver, see them carry out their art. We scrabble around trying to be good drivers, but they do it for a business, and it's awe-inspiring watching the way in control and smoothness that they operate vehicles.
I think I've said this on a previous webcast. A friend of mine, I've not done it, but a friend of mine has done it, and they said sort of almost every entrance to a corner, from everything you know up to that point, you think you're going to crash because you think you can't possibly get around it. Is that right?
Yes, it's all about preparation before you go in. The old race adage of slow in, fast out is the order of the day.
So back to these C4s, how many cars were up there? How many were in that scrapyard?
Well, quite a few, probably in excess of 10, I think. That's just a picture that you see now of the 86 Corvette, which was the Phase 1 test mule. Lotus developed 20 of these test mules to stick the Phase 1 LT5 engines in for development purposes. They could drive them around in the UK and anywhere else that they were testing without really being noticed that they were anything special other than Corvettes. At the end of their development life, when the wide-body Corvettes came into being around 1987, they were produced online in Bowling Green. The test mules clearly had no further use for their purpose. So, as with all development vehicles, under the scrapyard it goes.
Falls into the category of needs attention, doesn't it, that car?
You could say it needs a little bit of a clean-up and a lick of paint, yes.
So that is...
At the time, Ed Simmons, who was also involved in the project with me, he just described our project as just a lot of little jobs.
So how did you actually become aware of this? It's obviously a huge bit of information.
Just a phone call from an enthusiast that said there's Corvettes in a scrapyard. I didn't believe him. I said, show me. So with my knowledge from Lotus back in the early 1990s, or 89 rather, I got to the scrapyard and realised that there was all these special cars. This particular car that you're seeing now was actually upside down underneath, or in between rather, 4 other cars. The good thing was that the interior was saved from any damage from the weather by being upside down, and you can see from the holes in the plenum and various other places, it was pretty heavily smashed with sledgehammers and such. The actual car itself.
So they'd actually tried to destroy it?
Well, as with all development vehicles, they get normally crushed, or, well, in America, to scrap a vehicle turns it into a cube. In the UK, we generally consider that a monocoque vehicle, if you smash the body shell, then it becomes scrap. Clearly not true with a Corvette because of the frame, and you can unbolt the body effectively from the frame, so therefore it's rebuildable. That damage was actually done with a JCB, or what they call in America a backhoe.
So is that the car that you have, the thing we're looking at there?
It is.
Wow. So where did you start? Take us through where do you start with a restoration like that?
Oh, well, I mean, the first trick was actually, obviously, retrieving the car from the scrapyard itself and taking it to a place of secrecy, because GM didn't actually want us to own this vehicle. Lotus actually asked us to officially not to rebuild the vehicle. So after we took off all the mud and power washed everything, we saw quite a sensible vehicle with most of the parts still there. Well, effectively, it's just take apart, bag and mark them, basically. Bearing in mind there's no workshop manual to go with this.
Has any of the other 86 cars survived, that, you know, from that series of cars that they made?
Out of the 20, most of them were scrapped and cut in pieces. I actually still also own the gold cold weather car that you might see on one of the pages in Heart of the Beast. That's still in shell form. I have a spare engine ready to go into that as well. So out of the 20, I own 2 of them, basically.
Oh, right. Okay.
So how much of the car is original?
The chassis, as many of the screws, nuts and bolts as we could find, and there's a picture of the completed article. Badges, trim, engine obviously. Oh no, the engine's not original. We deemed that not to be reusable, so we used another good block that we found also in the scrapyard. So most of the interior is still original from the car. As I say, it was upside down, so therefore all of the interior is retrievable. Obviously all the bodywork was completely replaced. We actually sourced another 86 Corvette in America of a similar VIN number, and we brought that over to the UK to use as a donor vehicle, and therefore everything had the similar date stamps on the plates of metal and the frames and the pieces that we reused.
So I gather you had some help from ZF with the gearbox?
Yeah, it's a prototype 6-speed gearbox which went into production in the 89 Corvettes. That was also in development phase on these Mule cars. The actual gearbox, there was nothing really wrong with it. After, I think the car had 19,000 miles on the clock. That particular car was used for emissions testing, so it didn't really go very far and wasn't used very much. So the gearbox wasn't really that bad. There was one chap left at ZF in Nottingham who hadn't retired yet. He was the only one that knew about the S640 boxes. I had the privilege of actually going up to Nottingham to collect the gearbox, but he had it on a test rig, and I was allowed to shift the gears on the test rig, which was actually quite exciting from the early stages of the project.
And so, how long did this whole process take?
Well, I discovered the car originally in, we actually took delivery of it on Thanksgiving 1994, 23rd of November, I think it was. And we finally shipped off the half-rebuilt shell, and the engine flew out separately in 1996. Then we had a box of bits in my friend's house in his double garage in North Carolina. We spent most of the summer of '96 putting the engine back in with the trans, and then we spent an awful long time trying to figure out how the L98 and the LT5 wiring harness were mated together to make the engine spark. The engine was rebuilt by one of the ex-Lotus engineers, a guy called Jeff Gill, who you probably heard of. And that started up on his test rig in his garage in the wilds of Hook Norton.
So just because my maths is pretty lousy, when you first discovered the car, how old was the car at that point?
It was how old? It was scrapped in 1988, I believe. So it's an 86 car, and we discovered it in 1994. My mental maths isn't all that good, so 94 minus 86.
8, yes.
So Keith, you managed to get the car ready for the ZR1 gathering in 2003. Did you have any problems getting the car there?
Well, yes and no. The biggest problem with life with a vehicle of this type was that GM actually didn't acknowledge that the car existed. So therefore, the museum wasn't allowed to display it internally. In 1990, whenever it was the 50th anniversary of Corvette, we actually displayed the car outside. We weren't allowed to take it indoors. Since then, the car's been on public display 3 or 4 times in the US, but GM kind of refused to acknowledge or allow the museum to actually put it on display until the GM Corporation changed. In the old GM as we know and love, changed its corporation to a new name around about mid 2000, I think 2005 or something.
So was there sort of bad feeling, Keith, with you and GM over this?
Yes and no. There was Jim Miniker, who was the project manager of the LT5 project. He's got 2 hats. He's a lovely chap. I've met him quite a few times then and since. He's got 2 hats. He's got the enthusiast hat. He's got the GM hat. The GM hat said, I can't give you any information. I can't acknowledge this vehicle at all. The enthusiast hat was, yes, go ahead, put the car back together. It's great. There's been controversy in the past with Smoky Unit, with I think it was XP890. Todd, you probably helped me out on that. That was meant to be cut in half so that they could see the pictures in half, and then someone bolted it back together again. So it's no surprise that finally a car that GM didn't acknowledge was actually back in one piece. I think their main concern was generally the insurance liability more than anything else, that a car that was not a production vehicle could run off the road, kill loads of people and cause GM some litigation issues. That aside, that's all part of the fun, really, I suppose.
I've heard about your driving, Keith.
Yes. Well, actually, one of my ambitions was to actually drive the vehicle up the Corvette Drive of the Corvette Museum. That I managed to do in 2003. A very scary experience in first gear. I managed to get someone to take a video of it, so that's it was quite pleasing to me, and one of those milestones in the project, if you will.
Of course, the Corvette Museum getting into general news. I'm trying to think how long ago that was now, with the sinkhole. January, yeah. I mean, I was sent the news by someone nothing to do with Corvettes whatsoever, except they knew that I liked them. So it really did make worldwide news. How are they getting on with those repairs?
They fished all 8 cars out of the hole, and they've actually got them on display in the museum at the moment as they were retrieved. That one that is I think that's the Malik car. That's probably the worst of the 8. I know they were talking about they were going to get GM were going to restore the cars back to original. I think they're now talking about they'll restore the ones which they can restore, and the other ones they might just quietly leave on display as they retrieve them from the hole scenario. But, a couple of my friends were at the Bash a couple of weeks ago, and they sent me some pictures of the cars. But I mean, the Blue Devil, the ZR1, similar to my car, I mean, that actually, once they pulled it out the hole, apparently they could drive it out of the museum and put it on display. So I think that one was probably the one that was the least damaged of the 8.
I can't get over the size of that hole. It's extraordinary, isn't it? It's water under the ground, isn't it?
Well, it's water's washed out the sort of chalk or whatever it is they have underneath it. I mean, it happens all over the world. It happens particularly in Kent as well.
Oh, okay.
So,
yeah, there was a case the other day on the news where a whole road disappeared, wasn't there, in America?
So I have a couple of questions more for Keith.
Yeah, fire away.
Sorry, Keith, you were talking earlier about the 20 of these narrow prototypes.
Yes.
And I was very much involved at the time. It was great fun, and they were an enormous customer because I was supplying all those cars from my own shop with windscreens, wipers, brake pads, and it was a really good business for me. But what I'm interested to know is, you said that you've got 2 of the 20 cars. I know a couple of people in Florida who have at least 2 or 3 more. How many are actually still around in usable state? And how many literally got buried up in Norfolk?
Yeah, well, as far as I know, there was only the 20 of the 1986 Mule cars. The other cars that were either in the scrapyard or have surfaced elsewhere around, they're all wide-body 87 or up cars. Okay. So they're phase 2 or phase 3 engined vehicles originally. So I know of Tyler Townsley. He has one of the earliest wide-body cars. Now with a phase 2, I believe it's running it's actually running now. There was 2 or 3 89s which I took back to America, and I sold those off to help fund my project. Well, I think one used to belong to a guy called Joe Roebuck, a white candy white car. That was an 89. If you like, as a prototype, I suppose, a pre-production. There's to my knowledge, no other 86s around. I've traced some of the chassis of most of them, or rather, most of the chassis rather, and there's no I'm aware of in existence of the 86 type, which were the Mules.
So presumably, do chassis on these prototypes have VIN numbers? Like, yes or no?
Well, they do, yes. I mean, I have a prototype myself, which is you've done a feature on before, which is actually a 1986 car reconfigured into a 1988 with all the suspension and the modifications. Every single part is stamped actually with the EX number.
Right.
And also with a weight sticker, so they can assess the weight of the car while they're developing it.
Right.
But I have to say to Keith, I think what he's done with that 86 is absolutely fantastic. He has saved a really important car for posterity. And Keith, you know, congratulations on that.
Keith, I have to ask the question. It must be worth a fortune.
Well, like everything in life, how do you put a price on something where there's one of them? It's difficult to say, really. Who knows?
Has anyone ever made you an offer for it?
Will keep it into their collection. No. in short terms.
Oh, only a matter of time. Oh, well,
I mean, there's 3 or 4 people in the Corvette community that could or would afford it, I suspect.
Can I ask a question, Keith? When you brought the car over to the US, how did you bring it over, get it through customs and things like that?
Carefully. It was described as a series of parts.
Which it was.
So you brought it over as an 86 chassis, and you didn't mention the fact it had an engine and everything else in it.
The engine actually wasn't in it at that time, so it was in a container along with, well, both cars were in the container along with plenty of other bits and pieces.
And what are your long-term plans for the car, Keith? Is it going to stay in America for a start?
Long-term plans, it's 20 years since I first found this car, so I'm not sure how long I will live to see a longer-term plan. Just a little aside, when the car placed on display in the museum, which no doubt we'll talk about a little bit later, it was actually in exactly the spot where the hole appeared, which is really scary stuff.
Wow.
And the interesting side of it would be if the sinkhole would have appeared at that time, and GM had offered to rebuild all of the cars at their heritage centre that had gone into the hole. I wonder if they would have rebuilt the yellow car, being as they hadn't previously acknowledged existed.
Can I step in there? I think they would, because as you said earlier, Keith, that the old GM was the one who were worried about your car, but the new GM is literally a new GM. And as I understand it,
yes, I agree.
My own prototype, which I've recently been driving around Colorado on English plates and a GB sticker on the back window, people have asked about it. They say, well, you know, there's no real liability problems anymore because that was the old GM. And it's just a car now.
Well, in my investigation of all the earlier cars, Tom, I didn't come across your 86/8. It wasn't part of the Lotus fraternity, so to speak.
No, it was down at Hawthorne Whiting, and they actually sold it.
Oh, that's right. Hawthorne Whiting were the design people, weren't they?
That's right, and they ran it as just an executive car, as far as I could tell, before I bought it off them a person who bought it off them in the mid-90s. And I recently bought it back and then drove it across America to the NCRS meet in Novi, Detroit, after a 1,000-mile road tour, which was great fun. And it was awarded American Heritage by NCRS, which was really fantastic. Excellent.
I have a very good memory of going off to see some of the retired and other engineers at Hawthorne Whiting in the course of investigating the background of my car. And one of my fiery questions really was this wonderful balsa wood LT5 engine that Lotus produced. They produced two of them for design purposes and also fitment issues. And I've got this strong memory of when I visited Lotus back in 1989 to see 13 of their 89 wide bodies. We had a visit to their workshops, and I actually tripped over the balsa wood engine. I'd love to know what happened to it, to both of them actually.
So I wonder which one of us will end up with it first, because I also would adore.
Oh, you're in the same search.
Yes, absolutely.
The Vipers have just gone through something similar, because apparently the very early prototype Vipers, which I think were 91, 92, they gave a whole bunch of them, the prototypes, to certain technical colleges. I think one of them was up in Washington State. Anyway, one of the cars has escaped from one of these technical colleges and has now turned up on the road. And Chrysler have thrown a bit of a hissy fit over here and have basically demanded all of these chassis back because of, as Keith was talking about liability earlier, they're now concerned that because they're still registered to Chrysler, that, you know, if someone crashes one of these cars, then someone can come along and sue the Chrysler Corporation for, you know, whatever they want to sue them for.
Can't you argue, though, if something's been rebuilt sort of from the ground up, that distances them from that?
If you think you can argue against an American corporate attorney, you are...
Okay, no, fair point.
You're a very brave man.
No, I'm not.
You can't. You're a guy, they're corporate attorneys. They win, you lose.
Yeah, okay.
That's about the size of it, and I totally agree with you, Tom.
So, Keith, back to the car, and do you go over and visit it like a sort of a long lost relative, and what do you do with it?
Yes, that's true. I do. I mean, obviously, when the car was on display in the museum, it was for me a great feather in my hat, if you will, both from an enthusiast and a business point of view. Being the first UK registered car ever to be displayed in the museum, the recognition that comes with that, and also the banner waving that I inevitably do for the Corvette Club of UK. So that apart, yes, I do visit the car. I did visit the car quite a few times, if nothing else, to make sure that they've been turning the car over from time to time to make sure it wasn't any problems. But the car's actually stored in secure storage in America, in North Carolina. At the moment, when I took the car from the museum, May 2012, the oil cooler, there's a large oil cooler on the front of the radiator, prototype, obviously oil cooler. It had produced a leak. And so I've got the radiator pack out at the moment. I have another spare oil cooler, which I took over in my hand luggage at one point. And it's just got a case of I've got to be there to rejig some of the bracketry, which Lotus handmade everything, and then refit it and make a start on putting it back together again. So it's kind of a labour of love. I don't get over there as often as I can. Obviously, funds and time limit what I can and can't do. It's a great shame that it's not on permanent display anywhere, but nonetheless, maybe its absence has added to its notoriety. Who knows? A collector may come along and say, Keith, I'd like to get this car more displayed more publicly, and here's 20 quid, you know? Do
you take it out for drives? Do you go anywhere in it?
Well, no. It's not really a drivable car for many reasons. One is obviously the value, clearly. Secondly, it's not really in a completely drivable state. The chip on the ECM is restricted to 2,000 revs, because after that, the Phase 1 engine was notorious for blowing all its oil out of the crankcase breather. Consequently, I've had a chip made to restrict the revs on that. And obviously, it's not really a drivable car. It's not a car that you would want to go out driving in, unlike Tom's car, which is a usable vehicle and can be transported very easily. This thing is just not a road sensible car.
Tom, you've got your Rotary prototype. Just very briefly, tell us about that one.
Yes, that car was the Rotary, which is right behind us here, and we probably should do a separate feature on.
Yes, no, we absolutely will. Just as we were on the prototypes, I just wondered if
yes, that was built as the prototype 1976 Corvette, when the plan was to go completely Rotary for all General Motors cars. And it was mid-engine, because that was what Zora Arkostontov always wanted to do. And he produced two Rotary cars, the two-rotor, which I've had since 1983, and the four-rotor, which has since had its engine removed and is now running around with a ordinary small block in the back. And that's in the museum in Detroit. But my car, having been built at a cost of about $2.5 million, which was mainly paid to Pininfarina to build the body under GM styling direction, ended up in all the world's motor shows, and I first saw it in, let's see, 1973 at the London Motor Show at Earl's Court. And 10 years later I got the word that they were going to crush it because it was on the roof at Vauxhall. And it was only on the roof at Vauxhall because the GM accountants weren't prepared to pay the 4% import duty it would have cost to get the car back into Detroit. They said that's too much. Wow. Leave it at Vauxhall. The British aren't so worried about import duties and things. And of course it was effectively within Europe. And I said, well, you can't crush this car, it's too precious and too wonderful, and it's got a steel body, of course. So I then went and pleaded with absolutely everyone I could think of. And in the end, they got so tired of me bullying them that they said, OK, if you really want it, you better take it away. So I went down to Luton with my a trailer behind my DS21 Safari, which is what we used to use as tow cars in those days, and took it away.
I think you got down there pretty sharpish, didn't you?
And they said two things principally. One was, whatever you do, you had no engine in at that point because the engine had been returned to NSU as part of the license agreement. They said two things. One, whatever you do, don't put an engine in it. Two, do you think a small block will fit? And can you call us as soon as you've got one in?
Oh, really?
So this was the same two-sided view that you get from the corporation.
Wow.
Yes, that's exactly what I found with my project as well, Tom. Exactly, you get this two-sided view, and there's some people rooting for you, and some people have got to quote the corporate line always.
Yep. But I think now that that corporation is effectively dead, I don't need to worry so much. But I installed the Vauxhall Cavalier engine immediately because that fitted the gearbox which was in the car, which is basically a Cadillac version of the GM Hydromatic front-wheel drive transmission. And we got that fitted. It was great, but the only thing was that after about 10 miles...
The front-wheel drive transmission in the back?
in the back, yes. Yeah. After about 10 miles, because of the configuration of the exhaust manifolds on the Vauxhall 1600 overhead cam engine, the petrol in the fuel tank would boil. And at that point, I turn off the engine and get out and stand well clear, because there's something about boiling petrol in a car, which is quite a scary sound.
Unsettling.
It doesn't make the same sound as boiling water. It's something altogether worse.
Oh,
And we then reconfigured the whole car to take a Mazda engine, a 13B.
which is a rotary engine, yeah.
Which is still in the car, but the transmission arrangement isn't so satisfactory. And within the last 4 weeks, there's been a lot of interest in the car because, well, for various reasons, it suddenly seems to be making the press everywhere. But a rotary engine expert has got a plan to reproduce that original GM RC engine with modern materials, because he said the only reason they were having troubles was they're using the wrong materials, and he wants to use it for the drag racing classes in Rotary, because there's Rotary drag racing classes and also on the Bonneville salt flats and everywhere else.
Right.
And he's talking about making a series of these engines, and would I like one?
Oh, because the tolerances on a rotary engine are quite critical, aren't they?
Yes, they are, but I mean, Mazda have worked out all the problems, and they are a fantastic engine. But if I could get the original engine exactly configured the way it was back in that car, that would be a fantastic thing to have done, and I really, really would like to do that.
It's quite bizarre, actually, that two people in the CCCUK have got two of these amazing cars, isn't it? It's quite extraordinary between you.
I think the exciting thing is that it helps to shape the Corvette world, to let them see that there are Corvette crazies outside of the US, and also it just ups the profile of the Corvette Club of UK, and obviously the business is related to it too.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Didn't Jeff Gill have one of the other prototype cars in his workshop at one point, Keith? Not a yellow one. I seem to remember there was a... Because your Callaway was
yes,
there,
it was an 1887 car, similar to Tyler Townsley's vehicle. That was one that was in the Lotus scrapyard, and I helped him pick that up and stick it on his trailer at the time.
Because I know Jeff now lives in Michigan, so I presume he took the car with him when he emigrated to the US. But I don't know whether he's still got it or whether he sold it to somebody else.
It's been sold to I've forgotten the guy's name. Restores 53s.
Yeah, it's Brett Henderson.
That's it, Brett Henderson. Yes, yeah. And he's been talking to me about wanting to buy my the shell of my gold car to rebuild that, but he's rebuilt the Jeff's car, and it's, as far as I know, up and running. I haven't actually heard it, but.
Yes. Can I just cut in with my most extraordinary ZR1 story, and my most amazing and depressing, is that after Keith had got his car, I got a phone call from someone in Hampshire who said, would you be interested in buying 17 ZR1 LT5 overhead camshaft engines and gearboxes? So I said, yes, I'd love to. So he said, well, come down this afternoon and have a look. I drove down to Hampshire, and while I was on the M3, I got a phone call saying, can you stop, please? Don't turn up, because we've just had a visit from, I think it was Brinks Match, or the GM security people, and they've been told that I have these engines and they're on their way. So I said, right, how has this happened? And they said, well, there was all the engines were stored in my horse arena, which I'm building, an indoor riding school. We were having a roof put on the riding school, and one of the roofers saw the engine and thought, that looks really interesting. And so he called GM and said, if you bought one of these engines, would he be able to get parts for it? This then triggered an inquiry to Lotus. The Brinks Mat security people flew in overnight, and it coincided that as I was waiting to get the call from this guy, Brinks Mat were also on their way to look at these engines. Now, I could have got all these engines, as I recall, for about £10,000. And these were all good running last phase engines. I saw them all with the transmission sitting there. After the Brinks Mat guys had gone, he was told that they called a scrapyard in Norfolk, and they had to bring them all back and melt them down, and Brinks Mat watched them melt them, apparently. But I actually went into this riding arena and saw all the engines there, and it was just the most wonderful sight. I cannot tell you, to a C4 fanatic like me, and a ZR1 fanatic too, just seeing all these engines was incredible. So But
if you had have taken one away, what would they have done, or were they already?
Nothing. But they, at that time, they were terribly wary about any of these engines getting out, because it was, you know, the ZR1 was just on that point of being marketed as a proper running car.
We had the same security issue too. We had GM people actually looking to steal back our prototype, and we were moving it around, and there was many stories, some factual, some probably fabricated, of various procurement agents within Lotus that have been selling off all of the Lotus engines, or rather the ZR1 engines. It's quite fascinating.
Well, Keith is quite right there, but I have to say that the two books, if you really want to know about the origin of this engine and how it got to be built, one is, of course, Heart of the Beast, which unfortunately is out of print, but you can still find copies on eBay or on Amazon. But my favourite is Tony Rudd's biography. Tony was working quite late in his life for Lotus and used all his contacts to get this job of the new King of the Hill engine from General Motors, and sold Lotus's engineering skills to do it, and he was completely successful. It's a fascinating biography, though, because he started off working on the Supermarine Spitfire engine, the Merlin, during the war, then went on to work for the BRM racing team, and of course to BRM enthusiasts this book is absolutely the one. No one tells it exactly like it was. The sheer craziness of what went on there up in Lincolnshire with Peter Berthon and his crew. And then late in life he went to work for Lotus and got this incredible ZR1 job which absolutely saved them. But as a biography it's so well written and just fascinating, and I really recommend, if you can possibly get it, Tony Rudd, his biography.
So was Lotus's involvement just engines, or did they get involved in suspension and all that side of things?
I mean, the engines were actually built by Mercury Marine.
Yes, but
that was the production.
Yeah, but
that's what I mean. I mean, the Mercury Marine, which is basically a boat engine builders, they did the production engines. But I mean, Lotus did the chassis. Lotus did everything on the ZR1.
I think Lotus actually They developed the original Phase 1, Phase 2 engine blocks based on the spec that GM had actually passed them, with the V shape and also the cylinder size. Yeah. And he was trying to produce a car for 400 brake horsepower. No, 400 brake horsepower, I think. But that wasn't feasible with the restrictions that GM produced. And then once GM had proved that the Phase 1, Phase 2 developments were feasible, that I think the GM contracted Mercury Marine to produce the production engines, because they were the only people that were small enough to actually produce the engines that they wanted. Because when you consider that GM build millions of engines, they send out contracts for, can you build 1 million engines? And of course they weren't going to produce that many ZR1 engines.
But also Lotus did organise all the construction. I mean, I know that as I understand it, the cylinder heads were made by Bermid in Birmingham. The connecting rods came from Mule in Germany. I think the lifter buckets are actually a standard production part from VW Audi. And you know, it was very much completely developed by Lotus. It was only the actual final assembly that was done by Mercruiser, and they must have done some production engineering. But all the engineering, all the prototypes really were done by Lotus in England.
Oh, yes. It was all hands-on as well by their engineers. I've gleaned and captured quite a few amazing pictures from the early days of their workshops, and it was almost a hand-built engine made out of aluminium.
Wow. Crumbs, quite a history lesson.
Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing. Thank you, chaps. Now, as we're all CCCUKers, I'm just wondering if we should have a little chat about the club itself. It's going from strength to strength, I think. Why do you think people should be in the club, Gary? What do you think people can get out of being in the CCCUK?
Well, if they've got the car, then you know they must join the club because of the backup. We talk about where you can get spares and what to do, not to do, and we've got so many experts on each different models. The C1, C2, C3, and on.
I did all the wrong things. I think I bought a car, and possibly the wrong one. It was a bit of a dog at the time. It has now become a princess, but it wasn't a good car. And because if you join the club first, you can... Lots of the times people will say, I'll come with you and have a look at a car, won't they? There's a lot of friendly advice around. Yeah. Also, there are trips out to be had, whether it be... We took a drive, didn't we, the other weekend to have a breakfast on the top of the cliffs near Dover, or you can drive down to Le Mans with a bunch of people. So there's all that side of things. And if you are doing a job on your car, there's always someone who'll help. It is actually, I know when I took all the back end of mine apart and put a composite spring on, just to have someone else there. Stephen Irons came along and we've helped each other out do that job. And there's a lot of moral support to be had. Yeah. And of course, just, you know, we have in the Kent area, most regions have a club night once a month. Yeah. So there's a social aspect to it as well. So also a reminder that subs are due, or long due by now, by the time you get to see this. I have no excuse for not having sent mine in yet, but do keep joining, do keep being a member of the club, and if you're thinking about joining and you're just watching this because you're interested in Corvettes, do join the club. There's a lot of benefits.
Can I just say, Robert, I think something that we probably don't appreciate is that actually the club magazine is fantastic when you compare it with other club magazines, not just of other car clubs in the UK, but worldwide. I mean, if you actually look at our magazine, it's 32 pages full colour every 2 months, and the quality of the production of that magazine is professional quality, done by basically Timon and Carenza, who sadly are both leaving the magazine probably in October. So if there's anybody out there that is looking to be a budding editor or has some graphic skills and can take over from Timon, I mean, but I've shown the magazine to various people here in the States, and they are genuinely stunned at the quality that we produce for an amateur club. Yeah, well, we should go on record, actually, shouldn't we, to thank Timon and Carenza for doing such a great job on that. So please consider carrying on if you, yes, you have done such a great job. What I remember about the Corvette Club of the UK is, with me with my Corvette Club hat on now, most people don't realise that the Corvette Club of the UK is one, if not the largest single-make Corvette club in the world. Maybe the Swedes maybe have a larger membership, but most American clubs are actually smaller by their nature, and we've always been proud, I believe, to have the largest number of membership. I've got very strong memories of back in the mid-80s talking about the magazine, which I always considered the most important point of contact between members. I've got very interesting memories of having committee meetings where we'd all just finish our discussions of committee business, get out the stapler and staple 200 or 300 magazines together, ready to go out in the post. Of course, that was back in the days when the numbers of the membership were 300 or so. Now we're up in the 700 or so number, and I'm so proud and honoured to be still part of the Corvette Club and part of its history. You know, I think it's a fantastic thing, and I think it should continue for another 25, 30 years or more. And of course, a good time to mention that the website as well. There's a cracking website, search CCCUK and you'll find it. Lots of response to various questions. You won't have to wait long for an answer if you've got a question on that. You can also renew your membership through the website, which is what I did, because obviously living in the States, I just went on there and I did it with my UK bank card, and I renewed my membership on the 1st of May a couple of weeks back. In fact, I think you can do it with PayPal as well. I might be wrong, but I think you can. Yeah. So I have no excuse. I will do it today. And we also you won't be allowed into the Nationals without a card. That's true. That's true. Anyway, I think that just about wraps us up, unless anyone else has any pressing issues they'd like to get off their chest. I'd just like to thank all concerned for putting this production together. It's a really fun thing to do, and yeah, long live the Corvette Club of UK. Right, so that's us all done here on the Corvette Web Blast. Thanks to Keith for joining us, Nigel in Florida,
Tom, thanks for putting us up here at Claremont Corvette. Gary, thanks again. Also, thanks to our technical team, quite a team of experts. We've got Caroline looking after the pictures, Derek mixing the sound, and Cliffy cutting the pictures. So that's it. We'll see you on the next Corvette Web Blast. Bye-bye.